Hello and welcome to the first On the New Silk Road podcast. I'm your host, Wade Shepard. I've been traveling up and down the New Silk Road for the past, 3 or 4 years, documenting changes that are happening, interesting places, and meeting interesting people. And one of the most interesting people that I've met covering the New Silk Road so far is our guest today, Charles Stevens. Now, Charles he's pretty young. He's a university student from the UK, but he's already traveled up and down the Silk Road 2 times now. The first time was by bicycle. The second time was by Jeep. And Charles is here with us now in the UK. How you doing, Charlie?
Hey, I'm great, Wade. It's great to be in touch again.
Yeah. It's good to talk to you after that crazy journey that you went on. How are things in the UK now? You guys on lockdown?
I think like everyone, I'm at home for 23 hours a day, but the sun's shining and opening some beers in the evening, so having a great time.
Doesn't sound too bad, and it gives us a lot of extra time to do these podcasts. Anyway, so Charlie, what was your initial attraction to the Silk Road? Why did you want to go out and travel this expanse of the earth between China and Europe?
Sure. So, as a history student, I think the sort of romanticized notion that you talk about of the Silk Road has always been one that appeals to me on sort of a visceral level. But I think in terms of the first project that I undertook, cycling from Beijing to Tehran, a 10,000 kilometer expedition across the whole of Eastern and Central Asia to Iran was one that we undertook because it's known as the hardest or the longest, hardest, hottest and coldest cycling route in the world. So that was the appeal, and it was in hindsight a sort of a silly reason to do it. We certainly did experience a long and a hard and a hot and a cold route, but that's really what got me involved with the region and some of the changes happening there.
So about these changes, could you tell us a little bit about what you observed on this bicycle trip?
Sure. So in terms of what led me to the New Silk Road project was some of China's investment and infrastructure development in Central Asia. So in one particular case, we were cycling from Almaty, which is the largest city in Kazakhstan, to Bishkek, which is the capital of Kyrgyzstan. And one of the roads we traveled down was a new transportation corridor, a critical transportation corridor from Almaty to Bishkek. It was not, this corridor wasn't funded specifically by Chinese infrastructure banks or any other Chinese funding mechanisms, but it was part of the expansion of road and rail infrastructure in Eurasia. And from there, I learned about the New Silk Road. I learned about China's Belt and Road Initiative, and it all went from there.
Okay. Now, what about this Belt and Road Initiative and the New Silk Road? Now, what about it kind of hooked you? I mean, you could ride a bicycle, you can travel, you can research anywhere in the world. So what is it about this program in particular that you found relevant enough to command so much of your attention?
I think there's several aspects to that. One is the scope and the scale of it. It's an infrastructure project which is probably the most important development project since the Marshall Plan, certainly the most important development project in the 21st century. It was launched in 2013 by Xi Jinping in Astana. And it's all a little bit vague as to the specific details of it, but some analysts think that it will end up costing a total of 4 trillion and expand over 90 or 100 countries. Of course, the scope and the scale is contested, but anything of that scale deserves and needs to be studied, whether it turns out to have that scale or not. That's the first thing. The second thing is, me personally, I'm very interested in projects which help to expand and unlock potential of countries, of people, of regions, and at least the purported aim or part of the purported aim of China's Belt and Road Initiative is to do this.
Yeah, exactly. So now, what were some of the experiences that you had riding a bicycle? Like I watched your video of this trip, and it looks absolutely insane, man, right? Like going from Beijing to Tehran. Now, what were some of the things when you think back on it that really stands out in your mind?
Sure. So it was 120 days in total. We were doing about 100 kilometers a day, roughly. So In terms of some of the times that stood out to me the most, it had to be Mongolia. Mongolia is, in my opinion, better to see on a postcard than it is on a bike. It is a brutal, huge place.
The Gobi was tough. All I really remember from it was the wind, the rain, and just how miserable we were. Because no matter what the weather was like, you just had to get on your bike and cycle, and even though it was the last thing we wanted to be doing, we just had to get on with it.
And yeah, you have one windy day and you go, okay, that was tough, when you're going 10 kilometers an hour and you can't hear yourself think or hear the next person next to you talk, or yeah, it's just unpleasant. And you get and you go, okay, you try and keep optimistic about things and go, tomorrow will be better, and then when tomorrow's not better, it's worse. You're sort of in a dark place.
The good news was that Mongolia and the Gobi Desert was the worst of some of those headwinds. So maybe just to sketch out the route very quickly, we started in Beijing. We headed up into Inner Mongolia and towards Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital of Mongolia. We went into Russia, Lower Siberia, and the Altai region, which is like the Alps. It's a stunning mountain range. Down Kazakhstan, through some of the Central Asian states, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and then we finished in Iran in September.
That's like a pretty fascinating trip. And like, what did you experience? I mean, as far as like interacting with the people, and this is a region that's changing very, very quickly. Now, what was your perception of their takes on all of this change that they're currently experiencing?
Sure. So we were there in 2016. So a lot has obviously changed since then. Something I won't forget though was heading up in the Tian Shans when we were passing Lake Izit-Kul, which is a massive lake in Kyrgyzstan, one of the inner Central Asian states. And as we were cycling up past this lake, there was this big concrete block, and on the back of it were five letters scrawled in graffiti, and it was the words Trump with an exclamation mark next to it. So Donald Trump had obviously had some impact in that region too.
Did you have like any dangerous any close calls or any dangerous situations when you were on this bike trip?
There was certainly a couple, yes. The closest call was actually in the last week. It was the third last day before we entered Tehran, and we were cycling in a region called Bonjour. It's a town in eastern Iran, and we were heading out of this town early in the morning. It was about 6 a.m. and no problems at all. It was a beautiful morning. We were watching the sunrise. We had some fresh baked bread on the side of the road, and this car we had screeched off the road about 20 meters behind us, and we looked back and there was this big cloud of dust, and the car had flipped over. So obviously we alarmed at this. We got off our bikes and ran back to help the man he had fallen asleep at the wheel out of the car. And we stayed there until an ambulance arrived. Luckily, his injuries weren't severe. Obviously, he was going to need hospital treatment, and the car was written off, but it wasn't something that was life-changing. But then we thought, gosh, this car was 20 meters behind us, and the driver fell asleep. And 20 meters when you're on a bicycle is seconds. That's 3 seconds. So we thought, 2 or 3 seconds earlier, maybe if we ate that freshly baked bread a bit longer, we would have quite possibly have been underneath that car.
Yeah, that's wild, man. That's wild. But it's also pretty crazy that you traveled all this way on sometimes scantily developed infrastructure, and you didn't get run over, right? You didn't get hit by a car, and you survived, right? Which is, kind of almost a little miracle in and of itself, that, even traveling by bicycle through this region is more or less kind of safe.
No, absolutely. Something that I learned during the trip was 99.9% of people are lovely and their intentions are really, really good, and you have to really separate the people and the politics on these sorts of trips.
Once you strip away the global politics and religion, you're just left with genuine human interaction with people much like ourselves.
Iran, for example, there may be lots of tensions on a geopolitical level, but on an interpersonal level, we experience really warm kindness and hospitality from the people there. No nastiness or anti-Western sentiment in the slightest, just warmth and friendliness.
And it was just an opportunity to see how real Iranians live. And it made us realize that you've got to separate the politics from the people, because they're two very different things.
The biggest danger we encountered was definitely the weather. Cycling in the Karakum Desert through Turkmenistan when it's 110 degrees Fahrenheit was definitely a lot more dangerous in hindsight than it would have been cycling in Iran. So it was really the climatic variations and making sure that you had enough water, you had enough food, you managed to keep your salt levels up and electrolyte levels up, which was the biggest risk.
Yeah, definitely. So Turkmenistan, how was that? First of all, how did you get into Turkmenistan? And like, what was your experience like when you were kind of inside of this regime that is, more or less closed and kind of on the level of like, not on the level of North Korea, but it is kind of approaching that kind of level of closeness. So how did you get inside? And like, what was your experience like being in there?
No, absolutely. As of a fortnight ago, Turkmenistan and North Korea were two of the only states in the world that didn't have any officially recorded cases of COVID. So there are definitely some similarities. We had to use a visa agency, a travel agency, to help us with our visa permits, and it was difficult when we were inside. We had to have a guide with us, but we didn't encounter any problems either. It was a little bit difficult taking photos in Ashgabat, which is the capital, and filming. You absolutely shouldn't phone officers or officials or take photos of sensitive sites, but I guess that's common sense in many ways. But it's a surreal place. The whole of Ashgabat is made of white marbles. All the cars are white by order of the president. The city is beautifully shiny, and then you leave the city and it's a big desert. So there's a lot of oil money there that fuels the opulence of Ashgabat.
So you said all the cars are white.
All the cars are white. Yes, they're all. Every single car in the city is white. All the cars that you can buy, you can only buy white cars. So if you wanted a black Honda or a black BMW or a green BMW, you couldn't get one. You could only get a white equivalent of any of these cars. And that's only one of a load of presidential decrees which were issued banning certain activities. So men aren't allowed to have long hair, gold teeth were banned, and a range of other activities were also banned. The opera was banned too. So it's an eccentric place if you give it the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, it's like another world.
It really is.
So what about the people of Turkmenistan? Were you able to like meet and kind of interact with anybody there?
Sadly, not as much as we wanted to. It was definitely more difficult. There was less English spoken there in some of the other Central Asian states. We didn't have the same sort of conversations there as we did elsewhere, which was a shame.
That's interesting. That's pretty fascinating. Because like you have a lot of countries in like Central Asia that are becoming more and more open to the world, and then you have a couple of states that just aren't really doing that too much. And it's kind of this weird, this interesting dichotomy between them, especially like countries like Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, both formerly part of the Soviet Union, and now they're taking two very different political paths. And even in Kazakhstan, we're seeing like these old Soviet leaders kind of step down and go away, and the country's becoming, something more modern and more, international. And Turkmenistan just isn't doing that yet.
I agree. I mean, it's it's a complicated place for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So now tell me, so you traveled on this bike trip, across Eurasia, and then you still wanted more. That wasn't enough for you. So can you tell us a little bit about your next trip down the Silk Road? How did this happen, and why? Why did you take this other trip?
Absolutely. So the New Silk Road project was a research project or an expedition that aimed to gain insight into some of the key transportation corridors that China was helping to construct across Eurasia. So we were looking into the 24 main transportation hubs between the UK and China that was helping to construct this New Silk Road, which is part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. So we went to some of these key nodes: Piraeus port in Athens, Rotterdam in the Netherlands, Yiwu at the end, which is the largest wholesale market in the world, to interview some of the key actors, some of the key academics, policymakers and strategists who were really on the ground helping to put this initiative together, to really get a proper insight into what was going on rather than just relying on the media.
And what did you find? How different was it? Like when you actually went out there and seen and got to see how it was. How different was that than your perception, like from the media and from like what other people were saying before you went?
But I think in general there's a widespread perception that this New Silk Road, more specifically the transcontinental transportation corridors which are being constructed between Europe and China are coherent and fully formed, that there's big highways and railways that span across Central Asia to connect East and West. And this isn't true at all. There's been some new construction work being done, but at the moment it's very much regional in nature. China's put some significant investment into trade volumes and by subsidizing freight transportation between China and Europe, but in terms of new lines, coherent lines being constructed, this hasn't yet happened. So the scale is definitely one thing. The scale that is being projected by the media is more a projection of the potential rather than the reality and its quality and impact at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of wishful thinking out there, and it's also really hard to kind of keep track of like what's actually happening on the ground, because a lot of this information just isn't really being made available. So you hear of this big deal, this big MOU, billions of dollars going to this project, billions of dollars going to that project, and then you don't hear about these things for like a long time. And the only way to really find out what's actually happening is to really go there and experience that for yourself. So what were some of your experiences on this trip? You're on this Jeep. First of all, can you tell us how you got the Jeep? How did you get this Jeep?
Sure. So we were lucky to have a couple of key sponsors. Jeep was one of them, and we were also backed by CSIS, which is a major think tank based in Washington, D.C., Dezan Shira, which is a consultancy and accountancy firm in Beijing, Magellan Capital, and the University of St. Andrews, where I'm a student. Jeep, we got the Jeep, I guess, by the same way we got the other projects, by pitching it and coming up with a coherent story of what we were doing and our aims, and that linked in with what Jeep were doing too. So it was a partnership that worked for both of us.
And I have to say this here to the people watching this. Charlie is a guy who just doesn't give up on these things, right? Like what he's saying, it sounds like really, really simple. Oh, I just did this and I just did that. But like when he first contacted me to kind of help out with his Silk Road expedition, he had to email me like 9 times before I responded, right? So I seriously read this guy's emails 9 times. I was like, oh yeah, I'll get back to him. I'll get in contact with someday. And then it just became apparent that he was just going to keep emailing forever until I like got back in touch with him. So he just doesn't give up. And it's probably that, that bicycle, that long distance bike rider mentality, like going across deserts and over mountains, is that you just need to keep going. Because if you keep going, you will eventually get there. And this guy just does not give up on these things. So he's this random university student from the UK who gets all these big players in Silk Road research and investment to like jump into his project. He gets a big company, Jeep, to just loan him a Jeep to travel across Eurasia, right? These are things that are like very, very uncommon, and that without that tenacity and without that, just the spirit of just, going out and just grabbing, what you want and not letting it go. It's just really not going to happen. So congratulations to you, Charlie, for doing that. It was actually a pleasure kind of like, watching this trip happen that you took across Eurasia with this Jeep journey, because I know that the obstacles that you faced along the way, and you just kept going through all of them without giving up. And one of those obstacles you haven't mentioned yet was in Baku and crossing the Caspian Sea. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So, I mean, there were a lot. We had a team member held at knife point in Greece. We had another problem that we'll come on to with the Jeep at the border with China. But on the Caspian, we had delays in terms of the ferry crossing. The Caspian Sea is a huge body of water. It's the largest inland body of water in the world. I think it's the largest lake in the world, if I'm not wrong. And there's significant storms on this. And unfortunately, when we were crossing or about to cross, there was...
So what you did is you loaded the Jeep onto a ferry and then crossed the Caspian Sea in a ferry, right?
we did eventually, but we had to wait in the port for an additional 36 hours before we did this. So the crossing itself was extended to 4 days because of the storm, but we were also waiting in the port. So we were stuck on the Caspian Sea with some Ukrainian truckers who were also crossing because they couldn't get visas to move their cargo via Russia, so they went across the Caspian Sea too, from Azerbaijan to Kazakhstan, on this Soviet ferry.
Yeah, that ferry system is it's pretty unique. It's one of the last left like that on the planet. And they move trains like across the Caspian Sea too, using these ferries. Basically, a train just pulls up to the station. They take it apart, put the wagons on the boats, send the boats across, and they reassemble the trains on the other side. And that's actually how the middle corridor of the Overland Silk Road actually works. It's a multimodal route that kind of connects these overland railroads with these ferry crossings, and the trains go literally on the boats and go across the Caspian Sea. But anyway, once you actually left port and you're out in Caspian Sea, it takes does it take 3 days or so to get across? What was that experience like?
Sure, it usually is 3 days. For us, it was 4, possibly 5, but it was definitely at least 4 because of the bad weather. It was hot. That's what I remember. We were in a bunk cabin with 4 beds. There was 3 of us at this point, and the ferry wasn't at full capacity. So luckily, we had the whole cabin to ourselves. But it was the middle of summer in Central Asia. There was no air conditioning, so we spent most of the day and the nights sweltering and sweating. The food was very, very basic. We were served by the chef, or the Ukrainian men called her babushka. I think that's in Russian means grandmother. And she would cook for all of us. The Ukrainian truckers would spend most of the day trying to get us to do shots of vodka with them, which I didn't do very well keeping up with them. So it was definitely a losing battle, that one. But it was quite the experience being on a rusty old transportation vessel crossing this inland body of water, and then getting off in literally the middle of nowhere in Aktau in Kazakhstan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of one of the kind of quintessential experiences of traveling through Central Asia and the post-Soviet realm, is that you kind of get humbled by how little you can drink, right? Because I usually think, I can hold my own and go out drinking with people and hang out and remain somewhat coherent. But in Central Asia and the post-Soviet countries, man, I get destroyed, right? I just can't do it. I mean, there's small, thin women completely out drinking me, right? And it's just a completely humbling experience, especially since the ability to drink is kind of it's a sign of masculinity there, especially, right? And you're just man, I'm a bit of a wimp.
No, I agree. You don't know how to drink until you've drunk with these guys. Gosh, they can take their liquor.
Did you have any bona fide adventures on this Jeep trip? Anything that really stands out as being wow, that was that was an adventure.
Sure. I mean, what I say to people when they ask about this was when we were in Istanbul, we didn't even have time to see the Hagia Sophia. And that's not because I don't want to see the Hagia Sophia. I've always wanted to see the Hagia Sophia, but I guess one of the small sacrifices you make when you get to do something amazing like this is we were there to undertake this project. We were there primarily to conduct research and gain and document the progress of this route. And when you know that was the priority. I mean, when we were in Almaty, we got to go out. We went out 1 or 2 nights, which was great. But no, I wish there was more adventures like there was on the cycle.
But it was amazing to go to these fabled Silk Road cities of Samarkand and Bukhara and see the hugely impressive architecture of the Rajasthan, the Guramir, and the Iwans and the minarets rising out of the deserts, or the blue turquoise domes. And I would suggest wholeheartedly for anyone who has the opportunity to go and see these sites. They are some of the most impressive architectural sites on this planet.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to choose between, am I a researcher or am I a tourist, hanging out and having fun and, looking for adventures. I mean, if you go the research route, then, you have a schedule, and then like getting access to these sites requires, set dates that you're there. You have to set official protocols to get in touch with people, official protocols to get into the places and get access and stuff. So it's almost like a full-time job, like almost setting this stuff up. But anyway, so you spent some time in Horgos. I mean, a lot has been written about the Horgos region. It's kind of this binational development area between China and Kazakhstan. On the Kazakh side of the border, there's this dry port. There's a couple different train stations, and then on the Chinese side, there's the entire new city of Horgos that's just kind of going up, and kind of linking them together is this place called the International Center for Boundary Cooperation, which is completely unique, and I strongly feel it's like a one-of-a-kind, like it doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. This one-of-a-kind binational duty-free zone that is both China and Kazakhstan, and also at the same time neither China and Kazakhstan. It's kind of this island, this duty-free free trade island that kind of sits in between the two countries. Could you tell us a little bit about your experiences there?
So in Horgos, we were expecting to find just the logistics center. And this is what is marketed as what Horgos is. It's meant to be, or it is, a dry port which helps to move cargo from the Chinese standard gauges when the train tracks finish in China, not literally at the border, but in Horgos, and then they're transferred onto Russian gauges towards their trip towards the European Union or elsewhere. And the dry port on the New York Times or the Guardian or Forbes, all the big media outlets is front and center when looking at the Belt and Road. It's the bellboy of the Belt and Road Initiative. You'll see pictures of Horgos, but people talk very little about Horgos ICBC, which is the shopping mall. It's a duty-free, tax-free shopping area where both Chinese citizens and Kazakh citizens can go into this enclosed market. It's surrounded by a fence, so you need a passport to get in and shop. And this was really the hive of activity. And when we talked to people in Horgos, it wasn't the dry port that was emphasized, it was the shopping mall. And it was very, very evident that the commerce and the connectivity and the trade that this on a local level brought to the region.
Yeah, it's almost like an example of what the Silk Road is meant to be, right? It's this market in the middle of the Eurasian steppes that people from all over Central Asia and Russia go to do business with people from China. And it's something that people can actually access and do business with. And a lot of the local people in Horgos, they make their money just by going in and carrying goods out of this free trade zone, because it's highly restricted, like how much stuff you can actually bring out of it. So it's like a full-time job for some people, just going in and kind of being these goods mules and just collecting packages for people who buy them and taking them out, which these items are then shipped all around all around, Central Asia to be sold. And it's actually like one of the few, actually one of the few Belt and Road, New Silk Road projects where people are actually getting together and kind of like, trading and like having these, as Xi Jinping likes to put it, these people to person kind of interactions. And the first time that I went to the ICBC, I believe it was back in 2015, there was like, almost no people there. There was like a few shops that had, a couple like disgruntled Chinese guys who kind of moved out there from like the east of the country thinking that they were going out to the new outpost of progress. And then there was like, really no shoppers and nobody going to. But the last time that I went there, which was like 2018, I believe, the place was booming. There's actually like people there, thousands of people coming in, and the place had like really come alive. And it's like one of the most unlikely, it's in like one of the most unlikely places in the world because it's like out near the Eurasian pole of inaccessibility, like, the farthest place on the planet from like an ocean, right? And it's just an example that, these Silk Road projects, these new Silk Road projects really can kind of come alive and be something that people can really benefit, at least economically, the lives of the people who live near them. So after Horgos, and you guys get back into your Jeep and try to go to China, what happened?
Sure. So we left Korgos, the market that is, and we spent the night in the local town before crossing the border into China the next day. And we got to the border. It's a serious border, and it's quite an imposing border. So it was one that we had prepared for and planned for to make sure everything would go well. And we were doing the paperwork. We got through the Kazakh side. We got to the Chinese side, and after about a half an hour wait, we were denied entry. And the officials came up. They were very friendly and polite, and they explained that to get into China that we needed various permits for our Jeep, for the car. And these weren't things that we were told about. We had organised the trip through a travel agent, but this was something that had escaped the net. And after a lot of discussion and a lot of negotiation and fact calls to Beijing also, we decided that we wouldn't be able to get the car into China within our time frame. So we got it back on a lorry and sent it back to Europe while we continued through China on foot. Obviously, it was a huge disappointment and also a frustration given that we relied on the travel agent for this angle of things, but we were...
Yeah, I can't imagine, man. It's like, it's a bit ironic, right? That you travel along China's Belt and Road looking at these, Chinese, development partnerships, right? And you can freely travel all the way across until you get to the Chinese border. And then China, of all countries, is the one that doesn't let you in. When this Belt and Road is supposed to be about openness and international connectivity and person-to-person connections and the Silk Road spirit, and that's the country that you couldn't drive your truck, your Jeep through. That's that's almost mind-blowing in a way, right?
No, absolutely. It's definitely a big irony that when you get to the sort of the center of the Belt and Road Initiative, it's one in which you have the most problems at.
Good. Well, at least you were able to actually get in the country and continue the project. So how did you travel in China after that? So you had all your stuff in a Jeep, so you probably have a lot of gear with you now. Like you're standing at this border and all of a sudden you don't have your wheels anymore. So well, what did you guys do?
Sure. So then we traveled mainly by train. The trains in China are absolutely fantastic and also very, very affordable, at least compared to the UK. So we hopped on trains first to Urumqi, and then we went from there further into central China to Xi'an, to Chengdu, to Chongqing, before finishing in Yiwu. So we traveled by train to the major cities we wanted to.
So you arrive in Yiwu. You just completed this journey. You went all the way across, the Belt and Road from the UK to Yiwu. You traced the route pretty much of the UK to China train, the Barkin to Yiwu train, and you're there, right? You saw the sign for Yiwu. You're in the city, and you realize that this trip is done. How did you feel?
Obviously very, very satisfied. It had been an incredibly exciting but demanding two and a bit months, and we were certainly ready to at least have that phase of the trip done. But of course, it wasn't the end of the project. We had our footage and our documentation and our outputs to complete, which happened over the next couple of months. But it was certainly the closing of what was an important phase of the project.
Okay, so one last question. Now, what advice do you have for people who want to kind of retrace your journey or go out there on the Belt and Road or the New Silk Road and watch this development happening for themselves?
Sure. So I guess, well, my first thing would be if you ever want tips or advice, please go onto the website and send us an email. Always happy to help. But I think as general advice, if you're looking to get support and sponsorship, I think it's really, really clear to have your aims in mind and what you're wanting to achieve. Saying you want to travel the Silk Road and, go across Asia isn't really enough. That's just a holiday. So I think it's very important to be clear as to, what you're focusing on. If you're interested in the Belt and Road, are you interested in the environmental impacts which these corridors are having? Are you interested in the geopolitical impacts? Do you have a specific country you want to focus on, or do you want to focus on transcontinental transportation connections? So there's a lot of different angles, but I think doing your research and having very clear intentions, even if they're not academic or research based, it could be making a documentary about it, or it could be doing photography. There's so many different ways you could take it, but I think having clarity around that's really important.
Oh, that's great, man. That's great. Well, thank you very much for talking with us today, and I hope to finally meet up with you again. Meet up with you for the first time in person one of these days, and see you out on the Silk Road and do a little bit of traveling together.
Hey, me too. It's been way too long. We've spent way too much time talking online to not meet in person. So I'm very excited for when we do.
Let's do it, man. Thank you for talking to us.